There's been a slew of videos at the start of this season exploring what assault rifle is the best, and 2 of them have settled on the crown going to the MK16 of all things. Does this underrated weapon really live up to this hype? And why have I never ranked weapons in the past? Time to dive into another interesting investigation. Let's get stuck into it. There were 3 total videos recently talking about the best ARs, and 2 of these named the MK16. Let's examine their arguments, provide some of our own, and finish off with the 3rd video and what they have to say. Alright, so these first 2 videos come from AKingsCreation and NothingButSkillz. AKingsCreation shows some gameplay and goes over some numbers. I'm not sure where he got these numbers, and they're in damage per minute instead of the typical damage per second. I'm not sure if he's citing the sustained DPS or mag damage or what, but he's got the Lexington at the bottom of the list and the tactical MK16 at the top, so something unexpected is going on here. He also says in a note that the game core stats bugged, and I'm not sure what he's referring to here. I commented on the video asking for more details, but I haven't heard anything back. I'm also not sure if he's taking the full build into account, but he's definitely referencing the Tinkerer mask. He said he was testing it in the firing range. Now this is one of my pet peeves, when agents say a given weapon is stronger than another. They're usually referring to a higher base damage, but just using an adjective to describe it rather than just showing the numbers and letting those speak for itself is kind of cringe. Usually, this is just covering up for the fact that they're just looking at the damage numbers and not taking into account rate of fire. Though he does talk about rate of fire and he uses damage over time, he also seems to be constantly focusing on weapon damage specifically, mainly the weapon damage shown in the stat sheet. His weapons are using flatline and streamline with the linked laser pointer. So we got him kind of acknowledging normal DPS calculations, but constantly referencing just weapon damage and not showing his work. He also, at least twice, refers to his proof being just his experience in gameplay, which isn't a very rigorous methodology, to say the least. But in the spirit of giving him the benefit of the doubt, let's see the rest.
And I found out that somebody was using the tactical MK16. I wanted to test it out and see the reason why. And apparently this AR is stronger than the Police M4. So therefore, this is definitely number 1 right now in terms of weapon damage and the amount of consistent DPS at a higher end after a full clip is over. And then you pair that with the Striker's gear set that was allowing that.
Okay, so he's running Unbreakable. I'm trying here, folks. We're holding it together. He transitions to the rest of the build, which is a 4-piece Striker build. This has kind of transitioned into a build video, and I'm not sure how to feel about that piece of this puzzle. He provides no further explanation. Now, he could be right, but damn, he was not convincing. Alright, now NothingButSkillz is up. He starts off strong with mentioning seasonal modifiers and acknowledging the MK16's extremely low rate of fire compared to other ARs. He also talks about the MK16's stellar handling.
Now, another reason I do like the tactical MK16 is because the accuracy and stability on this weapon is still really good for a slower rate of fire weapon. A lot of times those harder hitting, slower rate of fire weapons have pretty bad recoil, something like the TKB, the AKM. While they all hit very hard and they are a slower rate of fire weapon, they just can't compete with the accuracy and stability that the tactical MK16 provides.
One thing that I didn't expect him to address was overshoot. See, every time we're using an automatic weapon, we encounter different damage multipliers that can affect our hits to kill. 2 of the most prevalent of these are crits and missed shots. so there's no way to predict when our targets will go down. So in order to ensure that we secure the kill, we need to keep firing until we get feedback that the target is dead. Usually this is through an audible or visual cue. After this, which might be delayed from when the target is actually registered dead by the game, then our reaction time also adds a delay, which means we end up firing a fair amount of unnecessary missed shots at the end of each kill. This is overshoot, and it happens on every enemy. NothingButSkillz tells us that weapons like the Lexington have a higher amount of overshoot since they fire faster. And one thing that I certainly didn't think about that he points out is that the global modifier increases rate of fire, which increases that overshoot problem even further. So weapons like the MK16 are better at stacking striker this season than previous seasons and also deal less overshoot than other weapons. After this point in the video, we run to a bit of a problem. He compares the handling of the MK16 with the Lexington by comparing the bar graphs in the stat sheet. These are somewhat useful when comparing weapons of the same type, that being two different MK16s or two different M4s like an M4 replica or a police M4, but these graphs don't mean anything when comparing an MK16 to a FAMAS or an MK16 to a Lexington. That being said, it is hard to argue that the MK16 isn't one of the best handling ARs and easiest to use, along with ones like the Lexington and the ACR. Then, Skills, like AKingsCreation, transitions his video to a build video, also running Striker. So NothingButSkillz has some interesting points that are actually backed up by some reasoning. But still, we get no math. Grumble. Considering neither of these gents did much math at all. Since the Blake tool has been down for a year or so now, and I'm working on getting it online, we're going to have to just do some quick calculations instead. This way we can get some objective information, at least get a piece of the puzzle before we go ahead and rush to any conclusions. We'll compare the Lexington, M4, ACR, P416, and MK16. All of these weapons have 4 mod slots, so we don't have to worry about crits. We'll just be going off of base damage for these weapons to simplify the comparison, and because every other multiplier is just going to fall out of the equation. First, burst DPS. I'm using the Lexington as the standard for these comparisons. The P416 and M4 are just slightly behind the Lexington. With the ACR and the MK16 you're behind as well, but not really by that much. 8% really isn't a deal breaker. Then, mag damage. This is where things start to get interesting. Once again, the M4 and P416 are behind just by a little bit, but the two slower firing weapons are ahead by a fair margin. I'm not going to go into sustained DPS because there are a lot of reload speed values from the stat sheet that are just plain wrong, some by a hefty margin. If you're confused about this, I made 2 videos on it. Check that out in the card or in the description. If we were comparing LMGs, sustained DPS might be a bigger factor because the reload times are much longer and they have much bigger difference weapon to weapon. With ARs, reload times are all pretty fast, so the difference is pretty negligible. So much so that in real combat situations the difference is more due to the player's positioning and reaction time to the reload finishing rather than the actual raw reload time. So what do we do with these numbers? Well, we've got many factors to consider. Here comes the third video I was referencing. This video was done by a blind noob and examines the Lexington and the St. Elmo's to see which one is quote-unquote really meta.
With several people comparing it unfavorably to the St. Elmo's exotic AR. Both weapons are top tier in the Division 2, but hopefully by the end of this video, we'll be able to crown a winner. Now, before we get into comparisons, you've got to understand that it's really difficult and almost impossible to objectively compare any 2 items in this game.
A blind noob usually does PvP content, but he does talk about PvE from time to time. In this video, he lays out the reason why he usually doesn't rank weapons or claim that a certain weapon is meta which coincidentally is the same reason why I've never made these claims either. Each individual player has different muscle memory, play style, confidence, along with other factors that can change how a particular weapon performs. What is the best weapon for one player might not be the best for another. Check out his video in the description so you can see his analysis. It's actually very detailed. But back to the MK16. What are some other things to consider? We are going to look at build synergy, handling, and optimal range. In this case, for build synergy, we can look at Striker and Heartbreaker. They all have a long rail for the linked laser pointer to pulse for Heartbreaker, but the faster firing weapons will stack significantly faster and get that extra damage faster. Our fast firing weapons shoot 30% faster. That is a huge deal. You're going to have an extra stack of Striker every 3 to 4 hits. That's extra amplified damage. And that's what perplexes me about these build videos from Skillz and Creation. They consider good enough for Striker stacking is their opinion, and the fact remains that you'll still stack faster with a faster weapon. Even though Striker seems to be the meta right now, there are still some other pretty good options like Tipping Point and Negotiator's Dilemma that aren't so dependent on rate of fire. So if you are going to use these slower firing weapons, maybe try them on one of those sets instead, given that these weapons have only slightly less burst DPS, but significantly more mag damage. They're arguably, just from a numbers standpoint, objectively better than their higher rate of fire counterparts with these sets. All else being equal, the extra mag damage won't necessarily translate to more kills in one mag, but at the very least can help you secure that one kill that you'd otherwise have to reload for to finish off. Now let's talk handling. We already kind of touched on this. Higher hit percentage due to better handling means higher DPS and more mag damage. The muscle memory of different players means some weapons will feel better to some players than others. If your muscle memory matches up with a particular weapon, that weapon is probably going to be better for you and not me. And I can't tell what that is. Nobody else, no amount of analysis here is going to determine which one is best for you. However, there are some exceptions. With SMGs, for example, wider spread is not controllable by the player, and if one weapon has worse spread than another, that weapon is probably just worse objectively, muscle memory or not. There are some ARs that fit into this category, and this is present in some other weapon classes too. As we can see, the P416 and M4 are basically neck and neck, but the P416 recoil is worse, and the M4 is just an inferior Lexington. They even make the same firing sound. The AKM is a weapon with lots of potential, high damage, good sustain, good burst, but everyone knows that its handling is just awful. So even though this ultimately comes down to the player, there is an objective component to handling and hit percentage. Remember, if you go from 40% hits to 50% hits, that isn't a 10% amplified damage boost. That's a 25% amplified damage boost. Alright, finally, optimal range. While the MK16 and ACR look very similar, the difference comes with their optimal ranges. The decrease in damage per meter after that is actually less with the ACR. So this is another factor to take into account. Now before you say, dispatch, come on, I'm always playing within 25 meters, so it doesn't matter to me. Listen up, Chief. Just try running Ranger and see what happens. The results will surprise you. I also have a video about that here in the card. Especially in retaliation and other open world activities, the sightlines get very long. Throwing on an optimal range mod really isn't that much of a sacrifice, and it can make a huge difference. So we return to the question that started this whole discussion. Is the MK16 meta? Well, it looks fucking cool, especially with the carbon skin on it. I find it to be one of the most controllable and accurate weapons in the game. But I think we can safely say that the MK16 is not the meta for striker and heartbreaker. But there are some other situations where it might be. I think ultimately it comes down to the player. And I think the even bigger takeaway from this discussion is don't always chase the meta. Try out all the different weapons. There's no way to tell which one will jive best with you without taking them all out for a test drive. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you're interested in more discussions like this one, subscribe. Let us know in the comments what's your favorite AR or weapon in general. How do you determine the meta for you? Be sure to like the video because that's the most direct feedback I can get. Check out our builds playlist for more, you guessed it, builds. And check out our explainer playlist for more in-depth analysis. Thanks for watching, agents. Until next time, this has been Dispatch. Take care out there.